All right, well, go ahead and get started now. I'm Jeff Furman. I'm a program manager on the Blend team, focusing on XAML-based design in both Visual Studio and Blend. And so a while ago when I came up with this session, gave a title, put in the abstract, everything was set, and then I had to go and put it together, and the first thing I found was there was a daunting word, awesome, that I put into it, and I had to determine what that meant. So in building the app and coming forward, I first approached it with awesome being the app I was going to show everyone and we were going to demo, and then realized that it really came out to three core components. And if you're going to design an awesome app, there are three things that you really need to have. The first is code organization. You need to have a really well-organized app. And by that, so in the particular app that I'll demo and work on today, my models and all of the core functionality of the app is shared because I have two different UIs, both a phone UI and a Windows 8 UI. So I have that in a portable class library that I'm using. The second, of course, is design and styling, making sure that you actually build out a really great UX with your app and that your app feels native on the particular platform that you're working on, and in addition, follows a lot of the guidelines set forward so that it feels like a native app on that to the end user on that device. And then, of course, third, in line with that is the platform features. As you're designing apps for, let's say, Windows 8, it could be that a user would take this slate that it's running on and turn it 90 degrees. And your app better be able to handle that, as well as snapped, portrait, all these different view states. And then in addition, theming as well. If someone switches to high contrast, your app should react to that. So really building on top of the features that the platform provides. So the app that I decided to work on really came about because I was at home with a bunch of friends trying to figure out which movie to watch. And this just popped into our heads. We decided to go ahead and build it. And it's two different UIs, both designed for the particular device that we have. So we said, you know what? Let's imagine that everyone had a Windows phone. Great. We'll build an app for that, assuming that everyone does, and they could decide what movies they want to watch on the fly. They see a movie poster. You can go and quickly add a movie to your list and then maintain a list of movies that you want to see in the future. And then if you have a bunch of friends together and you're trying to decide what to watch, have some way of viewing all the people who are there, select these three people, and then see the movies that everyone has in common. So with this particular app, that I'm going to use this really as just a way of exploring the tooling and showing off what Blend and Visual Studio can do and how to use them to really meet those key objectives. So this FlixDJ is what it's named, will just be the lens to explore these two tools. We'll start defining a little bit. The app itself is basically three different projects. I structured it with a phone app on one phone app, one Windows 8 app, and then a portable library that connects to my web services. I'm using Netflix and Flixster, and also has all of that business logic and a very small portion of the view model as well that I decided to put in there that is not unique to either one. That's really agnostic to the two platforms. And then both of them are using Windows Azure to store this user data and go back and forth. And so with that, we'll talk a little bit about the tools, and then I'll show off the app. Blend and Visual Studio are two tools that are provided that are packaged together now, that are used to build apps. And the first, Visual Studio, it's optimized for coding and debugging, as you very well know. And Blend is optimized for visual design tasks. And I say optimized because they're really not in isolation. They're meant to work together. And with that, as you have a natural progression of working on, let's say, model and adding a property on the right-hand side with Visual Studio, it's very frequent that you might change the name of a property. You want to go into your view and just change the data binding. You shouldn't have to go between the two tools. So there's these set of core authoring tasks that exist that's shared between both Blend and Visual Studio. And the idea that once you decide that you want to go build some rich animations and you go into Blend, which really has the screen real estate and it's designed for that, you can go ahead and do that and still come back and make a few modifications in these core tasks, even adding event handlers if you want, without having to go back to Visual Studio. So with that, I'm going to just jump in and let's see. Oops. Oh, this advanced. Oh, well. Let's jump in. We'll come back. There we go. And so here's my project. And I have three different projects in the solution. I have a phone app, my Windows 8 app, and the shared portable library. And there have been a bunch of other sessions, namely two others by Larry Lieberman and one by Daniel Tomorrow on portable libraries. So I'm not going to focus too much on that. I'll just show you what's in it. The first thing that I did was I took bindable base. And bindable base is a class that's exposed when you create any Windows 8 application. So if I go into this Windows 8 app, I'll open it up, and we can go into this common directory. And this is provided when you create a grid app or a split app. within the default project template, and the class is right here. And bindable base is a really nice implementation of iNotify property changed. And I like it for one key reason, and that's this caller member name. And this is a new attribute in .NET 4.5 that allows you on optional parameters, and you can see that it's an optional parameter, to not have to specify what's calling it, and it will automatically fill it in with whatever the caller member was. So I took this class here, and I just dragged it into my portable library. There's only one change I needed to make, and it was remove web host hidden, which applies to saying that this class is not applicable for JavaScript. But since my portable library is only being shared between phone and Windows 8, I'm using XAML, that wasn't a problem. So I put it in here. Then I have a person class. This is one of my models, and you can see like just a few properties on it, an ID and a name. I'm using the set property that's part of bindable base, and I don't have to specify in quotes the name of the property there, which always led to me making problems when I forget that I've changed, let's say, the actual property name, and I didn't update the string value. So that's model, and then in model movie components, I have all of my various items that I'm using as sort of a base to store all of the JSON requests back from the various web services that I'm using. So we'll go into the phone, and I'll just run this so you can see what it looks like. So this is using the new Windows 8 tools that were announced yesterday. And I'll start it off. And so I have a My Movies page, and it loads a list of all the movies that I've decided that I want to see. And then an Add Movie page where I can go and search for a particular movie, or I can just add one. I have it default to the box office hits, so I can just click, let's say, Cloud Atlas, slide over, and see that it gets added to the end. And then, of course, you can go to Settings to log in. By default, it remembers your name. And that's the app there. And then I could change my name and log in. And we'll go explore the Windows 8 version as well quickly. So I'll just run it right from here. Let's get it up and going. Okay. So now here I have a list of all the movies, again, that same list that I want to see. And I can select a movie, and when I do, it brings up a poster, and then I can click play to play a preview. I can go to All Flicks, and I can see what all of my friends want to see a list for everyone. I can also zoom out. I have this semantic zoom, so if I was using a surface, I could just pinch, or with the mouse, I just click on right here. I see these are all the PMs on my team. I asked them each to create a list. Click on, let's say, Steve, and he picked a Halloween-themed list, so I can see his movies. And then go over to Top Picks, and let's say we'll pick a few people. And then I see what we have in common, and I can select one. This is a nice animation, and then I see who actually wants to see that movie. So that's the app. We're going to really focus on building this area here, and then we'll build this All Flicks page as well. So let's go and do that. We'll kill that. Close this, and I have a somewhat blank slate here that we'll start with. So we'll start with the Windows 8 app. We'll just jump right in, and first thing, I have my list in the Top Picks page, but I don't have the All Flicks page. So I'm going to go and add a new item. And when I go to add an item, there are a bunch of item templates that we provide by default. And all of these adhere to the Windows design guidelines, as well as being rich in those platform features, so handle high contrast and view switching, view state. So I'm going to pick this grouped items page, and you can see it looks like basically a bunch of different groups. So it's pretty close to what I need. I'll call it my All Flicks page and add it. Oops. And I'll move it into the Pages folder, just so it's with the other ones. Okay. So now I have this page created, and it doesn't look like much. Part of that's because there's no sample data hooked up. But I can see that I have a grid view to host data, a list view, and then I see the application name and back button flowing through. So the first thing I'm going to do is provide data to this page. So I can click on the root, go over to the data context, and create data binding. This will bring up the data binding dialog, and I know I want a static resource. But the way that I've organized this is I have one central view model that's being instantiated via view model locator in app.xaml. So actually, before we do this, I'll go show you that. And if I open up the app.xaml, here I have this view model locator. And all that is a simple class that exposes one property, and that's my view model. And I just have it lazy load so that my view model only gets loaded once I actually need it. So now we can go back to the page, back to where we were, open data binding dialog, create data binding, static resource. And I see on app.xaml, I see that key, view model locator, and the schema appears, so I can just pick the view model and click OK. Now the next thing I want to do, as I scroll down, is I have a collection view source. And I'm using this for all of that grouped data. And that will be all of the people have a collection of movies. So I have a two-level hierarchy of data here. So I'll click on the collection view source and change the source. And again, I want to bind to that same resource. So I can collect view model locator, the view model. And this time I want to drill in and select all movies by person. And this is just a collection I have that implements grouping so that it knows about a key and has an enumerator. If I click OK, you can see it already starts to show something is lit up. But I don't need this items path because I can bind directly to that collection. So as soon as I reset, my sample data starts to show through. And so here you can see I'm getting some titles, no images, and then there's something missing up here in the header. So I'm going to go into this item template that's being provided. And this one is provided by default as part of the standard styles that's included in every Windows 8 app that you create. I'll go edit the template, edit the item template, and I'll edit a copy to put it in this file. And I'll just call this my movie item template and hit OK. Now I'm going to zoom in. We'll click the grid and zoom in just this area. The first thing I have is there's the title, and below it I have this other text box that's bound to subtitle. I don't have one, so I'm just going to delete it. And now I can select the poster. And I know that instead of image, the name of this is actually my just poster detail. So I can just type that in, and we'll see that my sample data, again, shows through. And we'll make it smaller, just to resize it so that I'm not stretching it so much. So I can just bring it in just a little bit. And now that looks fine. So I'll back out of this template editing scope that I'm in, into the main page. And now I'll jump in. There's also these header templates. And this is a special style. It's considered a group style. And I can find the header template here and just jump in and edit that. So I'll go in and I'll edit a copy of it. And we'll call this just a header template. And I can see that it's a button. And when I drill in, the button has a stack panel with two pieces of content, a text block and this chevron. And the chevron is meant to indicate that you can click on it, touch it. Since I have no behavior, I want to delete that. And I can just take this text block, and I don't really want a button behavior. So I'm just going to drag it out to the root grid. And I can drop it there and then delete the button. And I still have this text block. It has the same styles on it as it did before. And we can go bind. We'll open the data binding dialog. And you can see that because I already have bound up the grid view itself, it knows that this individual header is actually bound to a person. So I can just select the key, and it'll fill in. So I see there's Joe and Dave, all of them filled in. I'll exit template editing scope again and just zoom out so we can see it. And there I see 4 different people and some with movies. So it looks good for now. The next thing I want to do is add that semantic zoom capability to zoom in and zoom out. So I'll select the grid, and I'll go add the control. Let's just go down, semantic zoom. I'll double click to add it. And the semantic zoom, when it gets added, it has 2 components, a zoomed out view and a zoomed in view. And by default, we put a grid view in each of those so that you can start coding directly against that. Since I already have one for this zoomed in view, I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And I'll grab the item grid view, and I can just drag it in. And when I do, let's see, the padding. Yep. So I'm going to reset the padding. You can't see it right now, so let's just go and reset that. There we go. Well, and the semantic zoom is also at the top, which I don't want it. So let's just go ahead and drag the semantic zoom down, and I'll put it in this row here. And we'll check and see on the semantic zoom, let's clear out that so it fills this row and make sure that it's in the first row. Perfect. So here's the control. I do want a little padding on this inner side because the design guidelines call for a small gutter on the left side. So I can go in and go back to this. First, I'll make it auto-sized just so it fills this available space. And go down to padding. I'm going to add 100 pixels. And let's see. Oops. All right, added 100. And the semantic zoom. Oops. Let's see. Something. We'll stretch it to fill the space. All right. No, it is stretched. All right. Well, I'll just keep going for now. Pull it out. semantic zoom. There we go. Okay, there. So it has this space, and I'm using a padding so that when you actually go and pan across and scroll this list view or this grid view, it will go through that space. So it's only available on the left, but as you scroll content, it goes to the edge of the device, as opposed to having a hard margin that wouldn't allow that. So now that that's set, let's go and we'll go into the zoomed out view. So by default, I just have this empty grid view. And the first thing I need to do is bind it to data. So I'll jump in, go to the item source, and we'll bind this. And this time, what I see here is I want to bind to the static resource, and I want to bind to, in the particular page, that same collection view source. So I can go down to, here's my page, there's my collection view source, and I see the schema actually shows me what is bound to that collection view source, the schema of my data. So I have my movies, my person name, but I want to be bound to the collection group. So I can use this custom area to type in collection group. And now oops, although I meant to make that plural, so I'll just go in and change it here, collection groups. There we go. And as soon as I do that, you can see that these dependency all of these objects are appearing. So let's style that. I can go in, and again, I'm going to go into the item template for this guy. I'll jump into the item template. We'll create an empty one. This is just my person item template. And I want a text block to show off the name, so I can just add the text block. And now that it's added, let's bind up that name. So I can go back into the data binding dialog, create data binding, and select the key. And when I hit OK, it'll create that. And it assumes, at least it wants to give me a valid value that it can show. So I have this indexer. Instead, I know that I want it to be in the group. So I can just type group.key. And now all of those are showing through. So the next thing I want to do, select the text block, make it a little bit bigger just so we can read it. So I'll go down, open up the text area. Let's just go up to, let's say, 72. And zoom out. Now, I wanted them centered across the screen, and that's done with an items panel. So I can go back into this template, and I'll edit the items panel. I'll just edit a copy of the one I have, and I know I want it in a stack panel, so I'll call it stack panel template. And one of the nice things I can do is just right-click on this wrap grid, which is currently used, and you can see it's giving equal space to everything, which is why these names are getting cut off. And that's not the panel I want. So I can right-click, change layout type, and just convert that to a stack panel. Now that I have a stack panel, I can go ahead and change the orientation. So let's go to horizontal, and I'll center it. Now, one of the other things that's nice is instead of creating them, if you have available resources, you can just use them as well. So if I right-click here, I want to provide some sort of spacing and border around it. And I can do that with the container style as well. So if I go into the container style and apply resource, I already have one created. So I can just click on it, and it will just put them all in borders and space them apart. So now that I have that semantic zoom control built, I can click on each one, and it'll take me to scope, so I can design both of them on the artboard without having to actually invoke the semantic zoom. All right, so the next thing I wanted to do was go to the title and actually design that title bar that had 3 commands across it. And really, if you think about it, there are 2 components. There's the behavior and the design. And the behavior, it's 3 pages, and only 1 can be active at a time, so it's really nothing more than radio buttons. And then design, it's just changing the color of the text. So I'm going to add 3 radio buttons. First, I can delete these. I know I don't want this on my page. And when I do, one of the nice things that it does is it warns me that these were referenced in an animation, and it removes that for me as well, so I don't end up with random runtime errors when it's associating with the control that doesn't exist. So click to dismiss it. And I can go in, select this grid, and we'll just add 3 columns. And I can use this on-object UI that appears to say that, let's go into the first one, instead of 124, I really want it to be 1 star. I want everything to be proportional, so I'm going to make them 1. And I can go into the second one, and I'll do the same. Just type 1, and go into the third, just type 1 star. And now I have 3 proportional columns. So I'll go ahead and add a radio button to one of them. Scroll up, there it is. And I can drag it in. And now I want to zoom in on that area, so I can just go zoom, fit selection, zoom right in. Actually, I'll zoom out just a little bit. I can hold the control key, mouse wheel out. And now I want this to fill that space. So I can say reset layout all, and that will clear the margins as well as the width, height, and alignments, and set it to top or to stretch alignment. So here's the radio button. I'm going to bind this to a command, and I'm using an MVVM model, and I'm using relay commands. So on the data context for this, I'm just going to bind it to a command that I have, and I've subclassed it to give the command a few additional properties. So in this mylist command, it's a named relay command, and I'll bind the data context, and it has 2 properties. The first is if it's selected or not, so I'll bind the isCheckState to if we're active. And then I can bind the title to the content so that it just shows through. And the content is, there we go, title. So you can see it says my list. Now, one of the additional styles that's really useful that we provide in the standard styles is a text-based radio button. So if I go into Edit Template, Apply Resource, I can see that I have this text radio button style. So let's apply it, and I'll apply it here. And now I want to go ahead and edit that style. So I'm going to go and just edit this page, and we'll move to Blend for this. So let's go find this page. There it is. And we can just say Open in Blend, and I'll let Blend open. And we're going to use Blend to modify some of the properties of those states. So as soon as it opens, I'll give it a second. And there we go. Let it. Okay. So we're kicking off, while this runs, we're actually kicking off a new process. The new architecture for Visual Studio 2012 is to have every design process per project in a separate process outside of Visual Studio or Blend. And that really allows you to have sort of full autonomy in how you bring your sample data to life, and also ensure that if any mistakes happen or anything, we'll bring down just the designer and not the entire product, which was something that we didn't have in 2010. So I'll go and I'll select this My List, and I can right-click on it. We'll go edit the template, and we'll just edit the current one that's applied. And it's going to take me out of scope, and you can see it even told me it's defined in standard styles, so it took me to that document. So I have my list. I'll zoom in, and now I see the states. And this is just a style for a button or a radio button. So I see an unchecked, checked, and intermediate state. And I know that when it's checked, I want to change the color. So I'm going to select text here. We'll go in, and I know that the value I want was given to me by designer. I happen to have that, so I can make that pink. And I see that it's gray in the other case, which is exactly what I want. So I have checked and unchecked. Now I can just zoom out of scope by clicking back here on the page root and this chain. And it'll take me out of editing. Now I can see that my list is pink. So we'll go down, increase the size a bit, just so it shows. And one other nice trick is that if you want to just copy a control, because I want 3 of these, I can hold the Alt key, click on it, and drag, and it will create a copy of that. So I'm just going to do that, and I'll drag it into the second cell. And all I have to change now is the data binding, because I know I want this bound to a different control. So we'll change the data binding, and instead of my list, I want that bound to all. In fact, I can do it one more time quickly. Oops. And I just held Alt. Let's undo. There we go. Slide this guy over. And I know I want this bound to the top picks command, which I happen to have. So I'll just bind that. Cute. There we go. All right. Well, we'll run, see what we have so far. Build started. And then as soon as we go, one of the things I have, this control appears on all 3 pages. So rather than re-implementing it 3 times, might as well use a user control. So we'll go to the All Flicks page, see it load. Here's my items. I can scroll through them. And then I can zoom out. It's a little too big, but select someone, and it'll zoom in to that particular person. Great. So I'll shut that down, and we'll come back. So given that I really just want to use a user control here, I'm going to go ahead and just delete these for now. And I happen to have a control already already created, which is that exact same logic. So I can go into Assets, Project, and I have a command bar control. So we'll just drag that in, and I will reset layout so it fills the screen. I can zoom out. I can hit Control-0, zoom out and see the page, and there we go. So we'll move on. The next thing that I want to do is really design that user control and show how you design multiple states. So if I go back to that top picks page that I had, I'll go back down to top picks and open this page up. I've created so far everything other than this area that will actually show the movies. So we'll go ahead and create those user controls. So really what I want there is just, it's going to be some sort of collection that will show multiple instances of this control that wraps a particular movie. So I'm going to go ahead and just create, and I'll add a new item. Oops, let's just add it. I'll add it to the root of the project. Add a new item, and I want a user control. And we'll call this my movie item with details. Control. Go ahead and add that. So now I have this control created. I want to go and add a few lines of code to it. So I'm going to switch back to Visual Studio. I'll reload since I've changed my project. And after that happens, let's see, there is my movie item with details. So we'll open this guy up. And the first thing I want to add is a dependency property. And so this is going to have two states. Either it's selected or unselected. So I'm going to go ahead and add a dependency property that will map to that. So I have this prop DP, one of the code snippets that comes in Visual Studio, and I want it to be a Boolean, and it's going to be isSelected. And I know the owner class is itself, so movie item type, and default I want it to be false, and I'll add a onSelectionChange callback so that whenever this property gets changed, it will call this method. Let's go ahead and create that. So I'll come down here, generate a method stub. And now that I have this method stub, I want to check to see if the new value is true, then I'm going to call Visual State Manager, go to state, and I want to call it on the object it comes in. So I'll cast that, and I want to go to selected, and I'll use transitions. Otherwise, we'll go to unselected. And because this doesn't get called when it's run, since the value is preset, I'm just going to add this to the constructor. There are multiple ways to do this, but it's an easy way to automatically put in the unselected state. Okay, so now we'll go back into the user control. And because this user control gets its data from its context, and I want to have some idea when I'm working with it, I want to see some sample data, we can set a design time only context. So I can go ahead and just type d:\data context, and that means set the data context only at design time. And at design time, I need to have some instance of where my data is coming from. So I can tell it, go ahead and create an instance, and I want it to create an instance of my view model. And then I can tell it that design time creatable is true. And what that means is it's saying, go ahead and actually create an instance of my Windows view model, and then use that to bind to at design time. It's still useful if you can't create that at design time. Let's say you reference some services. If you put false here, we'll still go through and understand the schema so that data binding dialog will have all the properties listed. We just won't actually create the type. And because I would also have a particular instance of just one movie that I'm binding to, I'm going to set up this data context here. And I'll just type binding. And I know that it's bound to picked movies, and I just want the first instance. So I'll just index in, and now I'll have something to design against. So with that, we can go back to Blend, let it reload, and we'll go back to movie item with details. Here we are. And now that I have that in this particular grid, let's go ahead and resize it first. So I can go in, 300 by 500 sounds good. I'm going to Control-0 zoom out to see it. Okay, and now I know that I want to have a poster on top and some text on the bottom. So I'll add this, and I know that I want this to be fixed. Since I have a fixed height, I know that I want this top part to be a fixed proportion. So instead of star, I can click on star, and it'll switch to pixel-based. And then I can go in and type 422, which is what I want it to be. And I notice that this still says 1 star, the remaining space. I want that to be fixed as well, so I can just click on star, and you'll see it switches to the remainder and fills that space. Now I can go in and add an image. So I want the poster to be on top, so I'm going to go and add, let's just add an image. There's an image. I'll drag it in, and I'll resize it to fill. And let's bind this to the poster. So I'll go to source, open up the data binding dialog, and you can see it understands the schema because I put in that design time context. And I can just pick poster detailed, and one will flow through. Now, it has this odd border I want it to fill, so I'll change stretch uniform to fill. Looks better. And then I'll add this area at the bottom to contain the title. So I'll go into Stack Panel, we'll add a Stack Panel, again, resize it. And inside the Stack Panel, I'm going to add 2 text blocks, 1, 2. And the first one is bound to the title. So I'll go open the data binding dialog again, bind it to title. And this time, what I want to do is I'm going to use a converter. And I want it to be all in caps. So I happen to have this string to uppercase converter. So I can go ahead and use it. And when I click OK, we're going to create an instance of that in a resource, and then use that to bind to it. And now that string's caps. So when I go into the next text block, and I also want that to be caps, we'll pick the primary actor to show here. Let's go to primary actor. I can see all the ones that are already available in the particular context where I am. And since I created that one, it's here. I can hit OK to use it. There we go. So now let's make this guy a little bit bigger. it's a little too small, so I can go into font, and we'll just increase the font to, let's say, like 33, and we'll increase this guy to about 20. And then I don't like that spacing between them, so I can just click and blend. I see this icon, and I can just click and drag, and I'm just going to push it up. I'm just dragging my mouse to the left. And I want both of these to be indented a little bit, so I can select both, change the left margin to 14, and I'll push them both in. So now let's give this stack panel a background. There we go. And that's going to be what the default looks like. Now, the next thing I wanted to have is that icon in the middle that shows the percentage of people who actually like this movie. And for that, there's one nice thing again. If I go back to standard styles, and I'll open up standard styles.xaml. I'm still editing that. Let's go to code only, and I'll show you. We have a whole bunch of app bar button styles. And what's nice is they're designed to be, I'll just find it, app bar. There's a style here that's both for radio buttons and for normal buttons and toggle buttons that can be used to be put in an app bar. But they also have several other applications. Like I'm just going to use that here to show the percentage. And then in addition, below these styles, we've added over 100 styles that represent each app bar. So there's like a no app bar, yes app bar, more app bar that will automatically put that glyph for you. They're commented out because at runtime, we don't want every app to take the hit of loading over 100 styles. But if you need them, you can easily just uncomment one and use that particular one. So I've done that. And then I also added just a 2.5x transform to it to make it slightly larger. So I can go into resources, into this Flix DJ styles resource dictionary, and just grab the play app bar button style. And I'll just drag it in, and that will automatically create a button for me, and it will use that style. So I go ahead, and I know I want this centered. So let's just reset. We'll go to, oops, there we go. So we'll center it, and I'll reset the margins. Reset right at the top. There we go. So it's perfectly centered. And now I want to bind that inner, I don't really want a play button there. I want it to show instead the percentage. So I'll go create data binding. I can bind it to the percent picked. And we're all set. So now we'll make that overlay. And I want to have this transition between a selected and unselected state. Excuse me. So we'll start with the overlay. And one of the things I can do is I can just hide. I want to hide this button and this image so I can work in this space unhindered right now. So I'll go back here. And we'll add, in assets, we'll add one more stack panel that will fill this area. I'll resize it again. And now that that's here, at the top I want a text block, and it's going to say, let's say, Flix DJs who match. There we go. And I know I want it to be the same selected color I'm using everywhere. So I have a resource. I can just go to the resource tab, find my selected color, and just apply it. And now I want to make it a little bit bigger. So in this case, I'll go and I'll make it, let's see, about 25. And I don't like it too close to that edge, so I'm just going to push it in, again, by 14 pixels. And then below this, I want to have a list of all the people I'm using. So I'll go and I'll add a list view. And now I need to have all the people who like this movie. So the best way to do that, well, we'll start again with our favorite data binding dialog, item source, create data binding. And I have people who like the movie. So I'll click OK. And I can see that already I get the people, it shows up, but it doesn't have a nice item template that shows the name or anything else. So I happen to have one. If I go back to the top picks page, I have this template that I'm using here to show all these names. And if I go into resources, into this page, there's that person item template. But unfortunately, this is only exposed at the level, this resource, to this particular page. And I need it exposed to the app so it can also be exposed to that user control. So I can take this and I'll just drag it and move it out of that document and into this Flix DJ styles document. And you can see that this file even got modified. There's a dirty bit there because I moved it. And we'll go back into the movie item movie item detail control. And now I have this person item template. So if I go to edit the additional template on that one, we'll edit additional template, the item template, and I can just apply a resource. And there's that person item template. And I'll just apply that. And now I want this to be auto-sized. I just want it to fill the space. And so we'll reset height. And now you can see all three people appear. And again, we'll push it in a little bit just so it's not on the edge by about 10 pixels. So now I have my overlay. Well, let's actually make it an overlay, give it some color. So I'll give it a background. We'll make it black and give it some opacity, 75%. And I'll turn on these other components so you can see everything together. And now we need to build two states. So I'll go into states, and like I had already added the code, I need a selected state and an unselected state. So now in the selected state, I don't want to see this overlay. I'll even name it overlay. So one of the things I can do is I can select the storyboard, and Windows 8 has built-in theme animations that will be the same as every other app. So if I hit add, I can just add a pop-out theme animation. It's selected, pop in, so that it shows when I go to the selected state. So I'll select overlay, and now overlay will pop in this state, and I need it gone in the unselected state, so I'll go and add a corresponding pop out, and I'll tell this overlay to pop out. Now you can see in selected state it's there, unselected it's not. Now I want this button to move up as well, and for that I need a custom animation. So I'm going to put a transition. When I go from unselected to selected, I want that to move up. So let's go and we'll take the overlay out for now, as well as the image. And I'll grab this one, and since I'm in recording mode, I can hold Shift to keep this aligned horizontally and just drag it up. Drag it up to the top, and what I've done is add a transform to this of that value. So if I go into the selected state, I know that at time 0, because I had that transition, I also want it to be there. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply, not to the projection, to the render transform, that value, so it'll be at the top. And I'll come in and add my other things back. And I see this overlay is covering that, so I want to move it down. So I'm going to go select Flix DJs, go to the top margin, and again I can just drag. And I'll drag this margin down, down to there. And I wanted, but I'm going to undo that. I was recording, so I was actually putting a render transform on, which isn't what I want to do. So I can turn off recording, because I always want this margin to be this height, such that it's always below the button. So let's go ahead and drag. There we go. And now it's below. Now I wanted to give some duration to this, rather than it just moving. So if I turn on transition previews, so we can actually see what's going on, when I go from unselected to selected, it just jumps. I really want it to slide nicely. So I can open up this timeline, and I see the keyframes that I've put on this overlay. And this keyframe, which is changing, the button, that's what I want. And we'll go into the transition. So during the transition, you can see this render transform being applied. But I want this to take some time. So I can go ahead and select the render transform. Let's find the keyframes, translate Y, and just drag it out. So it takes some time. Second's probably a bit long. So let's move it a little down. And now, I meant to put a keyframe. Let's back up. That was my mistake. I'm just going to delete that, and we'll go back into, I accidentally moved it. That's why. So I put the render transform in unselected. So in unselected, I want it here. And when selected, that's when I want it to move. So let's go back in, and we'll turn off these things. We'll do that one portion, just try it once again. Button, get rid of the overlay. And now, here, I'll even set a keyframe ahead of time. I want this to happen about half a second in, and I'll move it up to where I want it. And you can see now it's put that transform on right at that time. So if I go and play this entire thing, you'll see it just slide up. And so let's go play the entire thing. So unselected to selected, that slides up. And then, I should show the things that I hid. So unselected, and then selected, that slides up, and then this pops in. And that's pretty much what I want. So now that I have this, we'll go and add it to the page. Let's go back to top picks page. And now that I'm on top picks page, I'm going to go ahead and add a control to host that. So that will just be a grid view. Grid view. Add it to here. We'll zoom out so we can see everything. And I'll fill the space. So let's just say reset layout all. And set the item source. We'll go ahead and we'll use the item source of the picked movies. And again, you can see my awful string representation of these. And instead, I want to use that user control. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll build first, since I just created this control and I haven't built yet. And then Blend will understand the type. Let that finish. And as soon as that's done, it's going to go ahead and reload the process as I have new controls. Okay, so I will give it 1 second, and then we'll go and edit the item template. one last time. There we go. So edit item template. Create an empty one for now. And this is really my movie details item template. Go ahead, jump in. And now in this grid, I want to have that movie item detail control. So here it is. I can just double click, add one. You can see it automatically populates with all that data. So there it is. And we'll go back out. Oops. Actually, I needed to make one more change. So you can see it shows me the most recent template that I've gone into. So I can click to go back. And I'd added that isSelected property in here. And it shows up in miscellaneous by default because I didn't categorize it. So this was my dependency property added. And we're just going to data bind that to show details. And I'll make that two-way. And I'm pretty sure we'll go back out and we'll make sure that the selected item is also bound. So we'll go to selected item. And we'll bind that to the, let's see, which property did I have for that one? I want to bind it to, there it is, the selected top pick, which is a movie item. Okay. And that we're all set. So let's go ahead and run this. And then we will we'll switch gears from there. Give it a second to kick off. There we go. Start up the app. Go over to the top picks page. We'll select a couple people. So there are some apps. And when I click on it, oops. Oh, it's not running the animation. I think I forgot something. Oh. All right. Well, we can come back to that afterwards because I want to move to phone for a little bit. So let's go ahead and go back to the phone app. All right, so we'll wait for this main page to open as we switch gears. So this is using the new phone tools for Windows Phone 8 that just shipped yesterday. And I have, this is my first page. I have a pivot control that I'm using because a pivot's more appropriate to the user interface that you would expect on a smaller screen resolution. And I have three pivots, 3 pages, my movies page, my search page, and my settings page. So we're going to go ahead and design the settings page. So the first thing I want is I want to have a way of going to this page depending on whatever pivot you're in. So you can always get to settings. So for that, I'm going to use an application bar. So I already have this application bar. I see the property there. And I just need to go ahead and add one. So I can right-click, and we'll go to Add Application Bar. That will add one to my project. And then to that bar, I want to add a menu item. So I can right-click again and add a menu. Oops, sorry. I undo. I wanted to add a icon button. So I'll go ahead and add an icon button. And I see that it appears on the design surface. I'm just going to call this the DJ name. And then I have this image URI. And I can go ahead and pick any. But there's also a whole bunch of ones that are built in. And these are built into the SDK. So if I scroll down to Settings and click on it, it's going to take that icon and add it to my project for me. So I automatically get this feature.settings.png added and then bind to that, which is really nice. So now I have the app bar set up. And I can go back to the page. And we'll design the rest of the page. So on Settings, I have a grid. And right now, there's nothing in the grid. So I know I'm going to want to have something that says enter your name and then some area to enter it. And then under that, maybe some space for an error. And at the bottom, I had this icon. So we'll go in. And to the top, I want to just add a text block. So I can go ahead and add one and say, enter your Flix DJ name. Oops, it's getting cut off. There we go. Hit escape. And now I really want this, I want the row that it's in to just be auto-sized to its contents. So I can right-click first here, reset layout all on this one. And then I can go into here, into the OnObject UI, scroll down and click auto. And now it'll size to the contents. And I'll come back, and now we'll add the text block. So in the next row, I wanted to have a place for you to actually enter some information. So I'll go ahead and add a text box, draw it out. And then here, again, we'll just position it. And I want it to stretch across, so I can do that. And then, with that text box, I need to bind to whatever name's being changed. So I'll create a data binding. And I already have my view model hooked up, so I can just go down to New Name, hit OK. I'll make sure it's two-way, which it is. And now that's bound to new name. And again, I want that to be auto, so I can just click through as well, and now it's auto-sized. And then there's one other thing I want. I want to have, if there's an error or not, I want to be able to display that. So I'm going to add one more text block this time, and I'll put it below. And this one is bound to if I happen to have an error string or not. So I'll select that text block, go in, we'll bind really quick, and we'll bind to if the settings page has an error. Right now I just have it say no errors at design time, drag it in, and then I can go over to states, and I only want that to show if I currently have an error. So I have some states set up for settings, loaded, and if I have an error state. So at loaded, I don't really want to show it, so I can just collapse it down. And when I have an error, I want it to appear. I'll just do that. And now there's one other thing I want to do, which is add that icon. So I can go back into my project, and I have, if I go and look, I'll just go here, project, I have a logo, and I want to use it. So I can just drag it out, and this will automatically create an image for me. Oops, I replaced the contents. I want to add it to the grid, and I also want to just add it to the base. I don't want to be recording when I do this, so I'll go back to base, dismiss that, and now I'll go ahead and add it right into the grid. I'm still doing that. Why do I have something? Because I have the text block selected. So I'll actually select this grid, and then we'll add it. Perfect. And I'll add it right to the bottom. And now the first thing I can see is I want it to be in this bottom row so that when I resize my device, it's always going to be at the bottom. But this grid line wasn't large enough. So I can hit Control and drag this out, and it will leave the contents where they are. If I didn't do that, otherwise at FlixDJ, the logo would actually get stretched. So as I hold Control, I can move this grid line without moving the contents, come back into this FlixDJ, and here I just want it to be bottom left, bottom right aligned. And I don't need it to have any margins, so I'll reset that. And I don't want it to stretch, so I can go into the stretch property and just say none, and that will be the default size. And I could even go now here and switch to auto so that it shrinks down. And with that, we could go ahead and run this. But I'm going to use the remaining time before we run it to go back and show off one other thing. So we'll switch over to the movies page. And so I have this movies page, and there's a device panel. This device panel is similar to what shipped for Windows Phone 7, but now that Windows Phone 8 supports multiple device sizes, we've added that to the device panel as well so that you can simulate that. So if I'll just zoom out a little bit before I make any changes. There we go. Oops, too much. And then I can switch the resolution of my device. Let's say right now I'm testing on a 480 by 800 device, but if I wanted to switch to a 720p, I can switch up and see that right now this cuts off actually a little bit before the settings. And that's because this control has a hard-coded height. And you can see it even left some space at the top. So I can go ahead and reset that and make sure that it actually is sizing appropriately so that people aren't losing text. And I can switch back and forth to test out what it will look like in various resolutions. In addition, I could also change the theme and accent color if you've done in the past, where if any of my text happens to be bound to an accent color, I could simulate that. So if I go back to the settings page, I could take this text, if I wanted it to be an accent when it shows up, go over to color resources, and I have this phone accent color that I can bind to. And it's a system resource. So I can bind to that and then change, if someone on their phone had decided that they wanted to use the cyan color, go ahead and click cyan. And once this reloads, you can see that now it shows as cyan. So I can test that at design time, and I don't have to test that on an actual hardware device. All right. Now, speaking of the device panel, it's also useful in Windows 8. And we'll switch back to Windows 8. We'll go back to the AllFlix page. And one of the things that's important is designing for multiple resolutions and view states. So wait for this to open. So if I go back to the device panel here, you can see that I also have these different views. We're going to exit out of recording. There we go. And one of the things I want to do is if I see how it looks in filled. So I can click on filled, and I see that this text is a little too close, which I could go fix. And then I could go into snapped, see that nothing looks quite right. But what I have down here is I have the control switched. So if I go into state recording and I go click on snapped, you can see that one of the things that I've done, and you see this little red icon indicating that a property has changed on this list view, is that the visibility property has changed. And the visibility has changed to be visible now. So by default, this template that I used has two different controls, a grid view and a list view. And it switches them out depending on if you're in the snapped mode, or if you're in landscape or filled. So if I jump back in here and we'll go in, you can see, you can see it still has the same template that it's using, like it did before. The poster doesn't show up and the title doesn't show up. We could fix that like we did earlier. But I am using that same item source that I was bound to before, and that's why the title shows up here. Now, for this particular control, this command bar control that I added, the command bar has states associated with it. It's just not switching. And one way to do that is if you wanted to have your controls all switch depending on when the view changes, you can add these events. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'll open up Layout Aware Page. So all of these inherit from Layout Aware Page. It's a type that we put in to the common directory. Yeah, I'll let that reload. Right here. And we have this start layout updates. So this is a method that you can call from anywhere, and it will add whatever is sent, we'll add it to this collection of layout aware controls. So we have this collection of layout aware controls, and when the window changes, on this window size changed, we invalidate the visual state. I'll go to that. And we go and we loop through all layout aware controls, and we call go to state on them. And so that by default, anything that you choose to register, you can register app bar buttons. Those are automatically designed to handle state changing if you register them, or other controls. In this case, I want to register that command bar. So we'll go into the Allflix page, and on this particular control, I can just go ahead and type, when it's loaded, I want to start layout updates. And when it's unloaded, and I want to make sure to do unloaded too so that we don't leak memory, I want to add stop layout updates. And these are methods that are on the base type of this page, layout aware page. And let's go ahead and run it. So if I go to Allflix, and now I'm going to hit Windows period just to snap this page, and you can see that this control has now adjusted to fit appropriately. So instead of being stretched, I just switched it to be vertical, and then here's all that list of movies, and you can see it does have the appropriate runtime data, just not the bindings, which we didn't fix right now, but we could. So I'll go and exit back out of there, go back to Visual Studio, and with that, we'll jump back to slides. There we go. Cool. So what I wanted to show was, first of all, the project templates are incredibly powerful, that they have built into them all of these capabilities that really enable you to build a rich app and not have to think about all these other components when you first get started. As you build richer apps, of course, your individual controls will also have to take that into consideration, but it's a good starting point. And let's jump forward 2 slides. Back to here. So the way that I think about it with these 3 points really comes down to that you want a solid foundation to work on. So build up from the code organization. Then you want great UX. So in your designing and styling, great UX is really important. And on top of that, it should really be feature rich. And that's really where I want to end and take questions. So thank you all.